The snow fell softly on the peaceful human colony, blanketing the world in a serene stillness. Laughter echoed across the frosty fields as two children played outside, their red and brown winter coats contrasting against the white expanse. They built snowmen and chased each other through the drifts, their giggles the only sound in the quiet air. Life here was simple, untouched by the broader conflicts of the galaxy. The colonists lived with hope, believing their remote location shielded them from the Empire's gaze. But peace, like the fragile snow, was fleeting. Above the colony, the sky darkened unnaturally. Shadows blotted out the sun as enormous shapes descended from the heavens. The Galactic Empire's ships pierced the atmosphere, their massive, angular forms dwarfing the landscape. The hum of engines grew into a deafening roar, and the tranquility shattered. Villagers emerged from their homes, confusion turning to terror as armed soldiers marched down from the ships, their armor gleaming coldly under the gray sky. Orders were barked in an alien tongue, but the meaning was clear: surrender. The colony's leaders approached, their hands raised in submission, offering to negotiate. But the Empire didn't negotiate. A single energy blast ripped through the elder's chest, sending his lifeless body crumpling to the ground. Screams erupted. The soldiers opened fire indiscriminately, advancing with mechanical precision. The children heard the commotion and stopped their game, looking toward the village. The older one, a boy, grabbed his sister's hand. "We should go home," he said, his voice trembling. They hurried toward their small house on the outskirts, their breaths visible in the icy air. But the chaos spread faster than they could run. Empire soldiers swept through the area, rounding up villagers, destroying property, and silencing any resistance. The boy pulled his sister into a snowbank, urging her to stay quiet. Their small figures shivered as they hid, clutching each other for warmth. Footsteps crunched nearby. A soldier's visor scanned the terrain, locking onto the faint heat signatures beneath the snow. The children's hiding place offered no protection. The boy stood, shielding his sister with his arms. "Please don't," he began, but the soldier raised his weapon. A cold flash of light, and the snow turned red. His sister's scream was cut short as another blast followed. Their small bodies crumpled together, lifeless, as the soldier moved on without a second glance. Farther away, the father trudged through the forest, hauling firewood back to their home. His face, weathered by years of hardship, softened at the thought of his children waiting for him. He imagined their laughter, the way they'd run to greet him, their cheeks flushed from the cold. But as he neared the clearing, something felt wrong. The air carried a metallic tang, and smoke curled against the horizon. He dropped the firewood and broke into a run, heart pounding. The sight that met him froze him in place. His home was gone, reduced to ash. Bodies littered the snow, friends, neighbors, people he had grown to love. And there, in the center of it all, lay his children. He stumbled toward them, his legs weak, his breath shallow. Falling to his knees, he reached out trembling hands to touch their lifeless faces. The snow around them was stained dark, their small forms cradled by the cold earth. He pulled them close, his voice breaking as he whispered their names, over and over, as if saying them enough could bring them back. Grief turned to rage, a fire burning through the icy numbness. His children, his world, had been stolen from him, not by fate, but by men. Men who followed orders. Men who killed without hesitation. His tears froze on his cheeks as he stood, the bodies of his children cradled in his arms. He carried them to a sheltered grove, where the snow fell gently, untouched by the destruction. With bare hands, he dug into the frozen ground, his skin cracking and bleeding. He laid them to rest side by side, wrapping them in the warmth they no longer needed. For a moment, he knelt, his head bowed, whispering a vow only the wind could hear. When he rose, his face was no longer that of a grieving father. It was a mask of unyielding resolve. He turned toward the horizon, where the Empire's ships loomed like dark gods against the sky. They had taken everything from him, but they had made one fatal mistake. They hadn't taken his life. For years, he had buried his past, leaving behind the name that once struck fear into the galaxy. But now he would unearth it. They had woken something far worse than a grieving father. They had woken the Baba Yaga. And for that, they would pay. The name Baba Yaga wasn't just a legend. It was a nightmare woven into the very fabric of galactic whispers. A figure of such precision and lethality that even hardened mercenaries spoke of him in hushed tones, as though the mere utterance of his name could summon him. He had vanished years ago, slipping into obscurity, leaving the galaxy to speculate whether the myth had ever been real. But the Empire, in its arrogance, had poked the bear. In a hidden chamber beneath the scorched remains of his home, he unearthed the tools of his forgotten life. The air was cold and stale, but the room pulsed with the weight of dormant power. Weapons gleamed under the dim light, a collection of human ingenuity and destruction. Blades honed to molecular precision, firearms that hummed with suppressed energy, and tools of sabotage lay waiting, as though they too had been anticipating his return. He moved with quiet efficiency, his movements mechanical and deliberate. He donned the armor he swore he'd never wear again. Matte black and unadorned. It wasn't made for ceremony or recognition. It was designed to make its wearer invisible, a shadow that struck before anyone could comprehend their fate. His hands hovered over each weapon, choosing with care. Each tool had a purpose, and each would play a role in the vengeance that brewed inside him. As the days passed, he prepared himself. The years of peace had dulled neither his body nor his mind. In the icy wilderness, he pushed himself to the edge, training with a singular focus. Every strike, every shot, every movement was refined until it was second nature. His body ached, his muscles burned, but he welcomed the pain. It reminded him of what he had lost and what he needed to do. Meanwhile, the Empire dismissed the incident as routine. To them, the slaughter of colonists was nothing more than a necessary enforcement of their rule. Reports from the field barely reached the ears of command, brushed aside as trivial. They were too consumed by their own self-assured dominance to notice the predator lurking at their edges. That changed quickly. His first strike was surgical. An Empire outpost, small but vital, was wiped off the map in the dead of night. No alarms, no calls for reinforcements, just silence. When a patrol arrived to investigate, all they found were bodies, their precision wounds a chilling signature. Supplies meant for the Empire's fleets were gone, and the faint, haunting etching on the outpost wall chilled them. "You took my children. I take your empire." It was the first ripple of fear. The survivors, though few, spoke of a shadow. A man who moved like smoke, whose presence was felt only in the aftermath of destruction. The whispers began to spread through the ranks. The name Baba Yaga resurfaced, spoken not in mockery, but in terror. The Empire's leadership, at first, scoffed at the idea of a lone human being a threat. Humanity was, after all, a species they considered beneath notice. But the attacks didn't stop. Transport ships vanished, their charred hulls found drifting in space. High-ranking officers were found dead in their quarters, their security systems bypassed with an ease that defied explanation. Supply chains began to falter, and logistical nightmares grew. Efforts to contain him escalated. They deployed trackers, bounty hunters, and even elite assassin units. Yet every attempt ended the same way, with their operatives never reporting back. Each disappearance was accompanied by the same chilling message: "You should have left them alive." As the Empire scrambled, he escalated. He didn't simply kill, he dismantled. Power grids failed at critical moments. Entire squadrons found themselves grounded as their ship systems inexplicably failed. It wasn't just physical warfare, it was psychological. He was everywhere and nowhere, a ghost that turned their own strength against them. The more they tried to root him out, the deeper his shadows sank into their foundations. Commanders began to fear their own shadows. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some believed he was more than human, a revenant fueled by pure vengeance. Others claimed he had no face, no identity, just rage given form. Among the lower ranks, desertions began to rise. Soldiers, terrified of the unseen hunter, abandoned their posts, preferring exile over facing the myth. Still, the empire refused to yield. They ramped up their efforts, pouring resources into finding him. They tightened their grip on colonies, hoping to force him into the open. But in their desperation, they made a fatal mistake. They underestimated the depths of his resolve. Baba Yaga was not fighting for survival. He wasn't fighting for humanity. He was fighting for something far more primal. They had taken his heart, and in return, he would rip out theirs. The empire's leaders convened in a towering citadel, its walls bristling with weapons and shields designed to repel any conceivable threat. Inside, the air was heavy with tension as they discussed the shadow haunting their ranks. Strategic plans were drawn, fleets were reassigned, and generals debated. They pored over reports, grainy surveillance footage, fragments of intercepted transmissions, but no strategy could account for the unpredictable fury that was tearing through their empire. One officer, braver than most, dared to voice what the others feared. This isn't a resistance movement. It's not a rebellion. This is personal. His words hung in the air, met with silence and grim acknowledgement. The empire, despite its unparalleled power, had no protocol for fighting a single man who answered to no chain of command. They decided on a baited trap, designed to lure him into the open. Using intelligence gathered from his previous strikes, they identified a supply route he was likely to target. An entire battalion was mobilized, reinforced with the Empire's most advanced weaponry. The convoy was no mere shipment, it was a fortress on wheels, every inch of it designed to withstand an assault. What they didn't account for was his adaptability. The Baba Yaga didn't rely on brute force or even advanced technology. He studied. He observed. He waited for the smallest crack in their defenses and exploited it with precision. When the convoy entered a narrow canyon, a place the Empire believed to be its strength, he struck. Explosions echoed through the cliffs, disorienting the soldiers and cutting off their escape. Their vehicles, once thought impenetrable, became coffins as traps detonated in perfect sequence. Soldiers scrambled for cover, firing blindly into the shadows, but their enemy was never where they expected him to be. He moved like a phantom, striking with surgical efficiency. The Empire's commanders, monitoring the ambush from their citadel, could only watch in horror as the convoy fell apart. Audio feeds were filled with screams, orders drowned out by chaos. The last transmission was chillingly clear, a single soldier's panicked voice whispering, "He's here," before static consumed the signal. The trap had failed. Worse, it had exposed the Empire's vulnerability. The loss wasn't just in resources or manpower, it was in morale. The Baba Yaga had not only survived their best efforts, but had turned them into a statement. He wasn't just fighting back, he was dismantling their illusion of invincibility. Word of the convoy's destruction spread quickly. The Empire tried to suppress the news, but the damage was done. Across the galaxy, whispers turned to open defiance. Colonies that had lived in fear began to organize, emboldened by the idea that the Empire could bleed. The Baba Yaga was no longer a lone avenger, he had become a symbol of rebellion. The Empire retaliated with increasing brutality. Entire villages were wiped out as a warning to others. They declared martial law, imposing curfews and harsh penalties for dissent. But their desperation only fueled the fire. The more they tried to crush the spark, the brighter it burned. Amid the chaos, he moved undetected, his strikes becoming more daring. He infiltrated a high-security outpost, assassinating a key general whose strategies had devastated human colonies. The general's death wasn't just a loss of leadership, it was a message. The Baba Yaga didn't care for rank or power. To him, they were all guilty. Yet, even as the myth of the Baba Yaga grew, the man himself remained unchanged. He didn't fight for glory or recognition. Every move he made was calculated, driven by the memory of his children's laughter and the silence that had replaced it. His war was not about overthrowing an empire, it was about ensuring that no father, no family, would suffer as he had. The empire's leaders, now desperate, turned to extremes. They authorized the use of experimental weapons, risking their own people in the process. They offered bounties so high that even mercenaries hesitated, knowing the cost of failure. But no matter what they tried, they couldn't catch a shadow. The galaxy watched, waiting for the inevitable climax. The Empire had overreached, their arrogance blinding them to the storm they had unleashed. And at the center of it all stood a man who had nothing left to lose, wielding his grief like a blade. The Empire's final fortress was a monument to its arrogance, a sprawling citadel encased in impenetrable metal, surrounded by endless defenses and battalions of soldiers. It was here that the Empire's leadership had retreated, believing themselves safe within its walls. Surveillance drones patrolled the skies, turrets tracked even the faintest movement, and the atmosphere bristled with the energy of shield generators strong enough to repel entire fleets. They believed that no force in the galaxy could breach their stronghold. They had not accounted for him. The approach was silent, methodical. While the Empire fortified itself, the Baba Yaga studied them, piecing together weaknesses invisible to anyone without his skill and determination. He bypassed their outermost defenses with precision, exploiting patterns in their patrols and blind spots in their surveillance. What the Empire believed to be their greatest strength, the overwhelming complexity of their security, was turned into their vulnerability. The first signs of his presence were subtle. A comms relay station went dark, dismissed as a technical fault. A supply line failed to deliver, assumed to be a logistical error. But as systems began to falter one by one, the leadership grew uneasy. The fortress, designed to project invincibility, began to feel claustrophobic. And then the lights went out. Panic spread through the citadel as power systems failed, plunging the fortress into darkness. Emergency protocols activated, but even those faltered as backup systems were sabotaged. Soldiers scrambled to restore order, but the confusion only deepened as reports of intrusions began filtering in. The enemy wasn't at their gates, he was already inside. He moved through the fortress like a shadow, his every step calculated. Guards fell silently, their bodies left as grim reminders of his presence. Security cameras flickered uselessly, their feeds looping images of empty corridors. Attempts to track him failed as he manipulated their systems, leading them on a chase through their own halls. The Empire's leadership huddled in the command center, their confidence eroded by fear. They argued over strategies, their voices rising in desperation. One by one, their trusted officers fell silent, their earpieces broadcasting only static. The fortress, which had once symbolized their dominance, now felt like a tomb. And then, the doors to the command center opened. He stood there, framed by the dim emergency lighting, his figure obscured by the armor that had become synonymous with death. The room fell silent as the Empire's leaders faced the man they had dismissed as a myth. For a moment, no one moved, the weight of his presence freezing them in place.
He didn't speak.
He didn't need to. The room erupted into chaos as the leaders scrambled for weapons, for escape, for anything that could save them. But they were unprepared for him. He moved with a precision honed by years of training and a purpose that no amount of power could match. The Empire's highest officials, the architects of countless atrocities, fell one by one. When it was over, he stood amidst the wreckage of the command center, the silence broken only by the distant hum of the fortress's failing systems. He stared at the shattered remnants of the Empire's leadership, his expression unreadable behind his visor. For the first time, the galaxy was free of their rule. But there was no triumph in his eyes. The vengeance he had sought, the justice he had delivered, did not fill the void within him. He turned and walked away, leaving the fortress to collapse under its own weight. He had no desire to claim the Empire's throne or to bask in the glory of his victory. His war was over. As he disappeared into the shadows, the galaxy began to heal. The colonies, once crushed under the Empire's heel, found new strength in his actions. His name became a legend, a symbol of resistance and resilience. But the man himself vanished, leaving behind only whispers and the memory of what he had done. For him, there was no returning to the life he had lost. His children's laughter, their warmth, remained a haunting echo. But in his absence, a new hope emerged, born from the ashes of his vengeance. The galaxy, free at last, would not forget the Baba Yaga.